Okay guys, so today, this is a little bit of a longer video, I believe, but it's going to be the only one for this week. We're going to talk about how to classify numbers. And that may seem kind of simple, but there's lots of strange types of numbers out there. So I'm just going to talk through them, and then I'm going to do a few examples from your worksheet, just so that we can kind of take a look at it. So first type of numbers that we're going to compare, and what we're going to do is we're going to essentially break it down from the broadest definition onto the most narrow classification of these numbers. So the first ones we're talking about are real numbers versus non-real numbers. So over on the left here, I'm making this box. We're going to have the real numbers are going to be over here, and the non-real numbers are going to be over here. And we're briefly going to talk about non-real numbers, but essentially we're going to focus on the real numbers because there's a lot more to talk about there. So the non-real numbers here, that would be numbers like infinity. That's not a real number, it's just a concept. So that's, and we can draw infinity with that little sideways 8 infinity symbol. Another non-real number is the square root of any negative. The square root of -1 is called the imaginary number. You'll get to learn about that a little bit more in high school. Another non-real number would be any number divided by 0. So if you try that on your calculator, you will get an error. 5 divided by 0 is undefined. There's no definition for that. So these are the non-real numbers over here. Now we're going to talk about the real numbers, which is basically all the other numbers you can think of. And the first way we're going to classify the real numbers is into two categories. That would be rational and irrational. Sorry for wiggling that everywhere. So the real numbers are here. We're going to have rational numbers on one side, rational. And then we're going to have over here the irrational, which basically just means not rational. Irrational over here. So we're going to split that up and just going to put a little bit over here. Actually, I think I'm going to give a little more space for my irrational numbers. But so irrational numbers. Here we go. Are basically, well, here's the more challenging thing you got to listen to. They're non-terminating, non-repeating decimal numbers. So non-terminating means it doesn't end, and non-repeating means there's no pattern. The numbers don't ever repeat. So that would be, so examples of irrational numbers, you could probably think of one really famous irrational number, which is pi, 3.14159, etc. It goes on. It never repeats. There's no pattern there. So pi is an irrational number. And then the other main irrational numbers that you need to know about are square roots of non-square numbers. So the square root of 5, for example, is an irrational number. Irrational numbers, well, I guess it helps a little bit to talk about what a rational number is. The word rational has the word ratio in it, and a ratio means a fraction. So a rational number is any number that you can make a fraction out of. So an irrational number is any number that you can't make a fraction out of. So if the decimal never ends and it never repeats, then it's impossible to make it into a fraction. So irrational numbers are numbers that you cannot turn into fractions. And therefore rational numbers are numbers that you can. So let's talk about the rational numbers a little bit more. Again, any number that you can turn into a fraction or a rational number, rational number. So examples of rational numbers would be like -0.3 repeating. And that would be -1/3 if you change that into a fraction. Just any old fraction that you see, 2/7. That's a fraction, so that means it's a rational number. Another rational number would be, say, 5. 5 is a rational number. You put it over 1, it turns into a fraction. So those are rational numbers. Then within rational numbers, if we were to add some more, those are just examples, but some more parts to the rational numbers or more classifications, there's integers. So that's the next narrowing down, integers. You may know what integers are. So integers are essentially positive and negative whole numbers, which whole numbers meaning there's no fractions or decimals. So basically integers are rational numbers that don't have a fraction or a decimal. So, and they can be positive or negative. So positive or negative numbers, we'll do that for numbers with no fractions or decimals. So, like positive 2, negative 3, negative 7, those are all integers. Within the integers, I'm going to give myself a little more space. Narrowing it down from integers, I should say, is that there are then, oops, you have to forgive my notability faux pas here, but I'm trying to make my box that I've drawn here a little bit bigger. So I'm going to try that again, extend this here, and extend this here. There we go. Sorry about that. Okay, so to narrow integers down is if you get rid of the negatives, then you would have whole numbers. So from there, whole numbers would be the next narrowing down, and whole numbers basically would be like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. And then narrowing it down one more time to our most narrow classification here of these types of numbers is going to be the natural numbers or the counting numbers. So natural or counting numbers. And those are the numbers that you learned when you first learned to count. You didn't learn the number 0 when you learned to count. The first number you started with was 1. 1, 2, 3. So you didn't learn the concept of 0 until you're a little bit older. So the natural numbers are essentially the whole numbers, but without 0. So 1, 2, 3. And again, the whole numbers would be the natural numbers plus 0. Integers would be whole numbers plus the negative version of those. Okay, and then the broader categories, that all of those would be rational numbers, and that would include numbers that are not whole, so like 2/7 and negative 0.3 repeating, and all of those. And then both rational and irrational numbers are in the real numbers category. So I should probably get rid of that. Oh, didn't mean to get rid of that whole thing. Oh well. But rational and irrational numbers are all real numbers. And then there's the non-real numbers, infinity, the imaginary number, and any number divided by 0. Those are examples of non-real numbers. So that's just classifying all of those. I'm now going to go over your worksheet a little bit so that I can show you which category or categories these belong in. So name the set or sets to which each number belongs. So negative 15, so where would that fit? So it doesn't have like a partial number there, so it's not just rational, but it's going to be an integer. So this is going to be an integer. Let me get my pencil, there we go. So this is going to be an integer, which means that of course it is then a rational number, which means it is in the real number category. So those are for each of these, I want you to kind of go through every part that it could be in. So like the number 6 here on number 5, this is going to fit every one of these except for the non-real numbers. So the number So this one right here, if we look at what we've got over here, it's a natural number, it's a whole number, it's an integer, it's a rational number, it's a real number. So it's going to have 5 things. So natural, whole, integer, rational, and real. So that's what number 6 would be. Where would number 3 be? So this is going to be, I'm not going to write it all down, but number 3 is the square root of 30. 30 is not a square number, so you can't just get a whole number out of that. So it's going to be in the irrational category. It's the square root of a non-square number, so it's going to be irrational, and it's going to be a real number. And so what your job is with this worksheet here is just to go through and classify all of these. Any of these that can be written as a fraction of one number over the other, one whole number over another whole number, or one integer over another, is considered to be a rational number, and the other ones you can't. So see if you can figure these out. A lot of them should be pretty quick to kind of see what they are, and that's your worksheet.